So let's cultivate our motivation and appreciating our precious human life and the fact that we have encountered the Buddha's teachings. Then let's have a firm determination to make our life meaningful and useful, especially by listening to teachings on the ultimate nature of reality. And so to have a firm determination to listen well and to think about the teachings and put them into practice so that we can liberate ourselves and all others from cyclic existence. Okay, so for those of you who hopefully will listen to the recording, the reason this isn't online now, or might be online going in and out, is because there's a thunderstorm here, and so we can't use the telephone because it's plugged directly in the wall. And while we can use the computer on the batteries, the thunderstorm is preventing the connection with the satellite. So, even though this is a teaching on emptiness, we are practicing patience. Okay? So, let's continue. We're going to talk a little bit this time about freedom from cyclic existence and the object of negation and elaborations and these kinds of things. Okay, so as we've seen that it's the ignorance that grasps at true existence that is the root cause of cyclic existence, and that we have to negate the referent object of that grasping, the true existence. Okay, and so Tsongkhapa said, furthermore, without coming to disbelieve the object of the grasping at a self of persons, a realization of selflessness cannot occur. Okay, so we have to disbelieve the object that the self-grasping ignorance is holding to. And if we don't do that, if we don't refute it, then we can't come to a realization of selflessness. Okay? And when we realize selflessness directly, okay. Anyway, so let's continue. So we have to negate the object in negation. Yeah, and then if we do, if we're able to realize the lack of inherent existence, then that serves to cut the root of all the other afflictions. So there's a very nice quote from a sutra which says, it is like this. For example, when the roots of a tree are cut, all the branches, leaves, and twigs dry. Similarly, when the view of the perishing aggregates is pacified, all afflictions and auxiliary afflictions are pacified. Okay, so when you cut the trunk of the tree, then everything else falls down. When you cut the root samsara, cut the trunk of samsara, the grasping at inherent existence, all the afflictions can no longer function. So, although all of Buddha's teachings do not directly speak of selflessness, they all are directly or indirectly leading to selflessness, okay? Because it's the realization of selflessness that enables us to cut the root of samsara. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about elaborations, and then something called, the Tibetan is rikshe, and this is really difficult to translate. In some texts you'll find it translated as reasoning consciousness, but when we hear the term reasoning, we think of intellectual reasoning and words and stuff like that. And this consciousness is not like that. I mean, it may be, it may use thought, but it also can be non-conceptual, you know. In other words, it can be like a probing awareness that is probing the nature of reality. Okay, so I'll call it probing awareness, but in other books, if you see reasoning consciousness, just know that it's the same term. But it doesn't mean that you're necessarily thinking and going through a lot of arguments on an intellectual level. Okay, but you're probing the nature of reality. Okay, and then elaborations, it's another term you hear a lot. Okay, and you know, it's one of those difficult terms. It's used in different situations in different ways, okay? In general, there's 3 different meanings for elaborations. Okay, so there's the elaboration of true existence or inherent existence, and it's called elaboration because it's, you know, when you elaborate, you add something. So, you know, believing in true existence is adding something to the way phenomena exist that isn't there. Okay, there's the elaboration of conceptuality, in which an object is cognized by an inferential consciousness via the medium of a meaning generality. Okay, so that's an elaboration because you're adding a meaning generality into the mix. Okay, the mind isn't perceiving something directly. There's a meaning generality. Okay, and then the third kind of elaboration is the elaboration of dualism, which is the appearance of a subject and an object. Okay, in our ordinary thought processes, yeah, most of the time we have all 3. Yeah, we have the elaboration of inherent existence. Things appear inherently existent. We don't always grasp them to be inherently existent, but very often we do. Then in our thought processes, because we're perceiving things by means of the meaning generality, we have that elaboration, and we also are perceiving a distinct subject and object, you know, that are different. So we have those 3 elaborations. We use reasoning, we use this probing awareness to overcome those elaborations, and there's 2 kinds of probing awareness. One is a non-conceptual exalted wisdom of an Arya's meditative equipoise that directly perceives emptiness. Okay, there's a lot of words in there. You got an Arya is somebody who's realized the ultimate nature. It's their exalted wisdom, so it's a special kind of wisdom. It's they are in meditative equipoise, which means they are focused single-pointedly on this. If it's meditative equipoise on emptiness, they're focused single-pointedly on emptiness, and they are directly perceiving emptiness. Okay, so that's one type of probing awareness, and the other is an inferential or a conceptual probing awareness that realizes emptiness but in dependence upon that meaning generality. So when we were talking about, you know, the different steps that we go through to realize emptiness, how we have to go through that step of having an inference, and an inference is conceptual, and we're apprehending emptiness, but not directly because there's that veil of the meaning generality. Okay, so that's this one. Okay, so that conceptual inferential probing awareness, okay, it realizes emptiness, but not directly. So of the 3 elaborations, it only eliminates the first one, which was the elaboration of true existence. And it does that by seeing the emptiness of true existence. But it doesn't eliminate the elaboration of a meaning generality because it's a conceptual realization. And it doesn't eliminate the elaboration of the subject and object, okay, the subject and object appearing to that mind, because it, you know, when you have a conceptual understanding, there's always subject and object there, okay? The first, the non-conceptual exalted wisdom of an Arya's meditative equipoise that directly realizes emptiness, that first kind of probing awareness, that eliminates all three kinds of elaborations. Okay? So it eliminates the first one because it directly perceives emptiness. Okay? It will not because it directly perceives, but because it perceives emptiness. Yes, there he is. Thank you. It eliminates conceptuality because it's perceiving emptiness directly, so there's no meaning generality. And it eliminates the elaboration of the appearance of subject and object because the mind is completely fused with emptiness. They say like water poured in water. Okay. Then I talked last time a little bit about how we have the self of persons and the self-grasping of persons and the selflessness of persons, and then how we have the self of phenomena, the self-grasping of phenomena, and the selflessness of phenomena. Remember that? Okay. And that amongst the self, when we're talking about the self of persons, there's, you know, all of us, you know, holding anybody as inherently existent is grasping at a self of persons. But the one that is particularly problematic for us is when we grasp our own self as inherently existent. And that one is the view of the transitory aggregates. Okay? So that's just a review. Okay. Now, usually what they recommend is to start to understand emptiness by means of an example. An example is supposed to be easier to understand. Okay, so they usually give an example of, in olden times, a cart or a chariot, you know. I think it's the same word for both of them. Depends whether you want to be elaborate and think of chariot or you're content with a cart. But that's a phenomena, okay? So we're using that phenomena as an example to get used to the reasoning and so forth. But they say that it's actually easier to gain the realization of ourself, the I, the self of persons, which is our own I, to understand that doesn't exist as it appears, okay? But it's a tricky thing, and Jeffrey pointed it out when he was here, because usually the example should be easier to understand than the actual thing. So why is the example something that has to do with the phenomena? But they say that understanding the emptiness of the self is easier. A phenomena should be easier to understand if that's used as the example. They say that the person, it's easier to understand the selflessness of person, our own self, because the self, the conventional self already is one of those abstract composites. Remember, in the three types of impermanent phenomena, we have form, consciousness, and abstract composites. So the person is an abstract composite. So it's already imputedly existent in the sense that the aggregates have to appear before you can realize a person is there. Okay, so already by being an abstract composite, they say that it's a little less solid to our minds than, a form or a consciousness is. That's what they say. But, in usually when they teach emptiness, they teach you to meditate on the selflessness of your own I first. Like I said, the example is the phenomena, like a cart or a chariot. And in some cases, like in the Haruka Tantra, they present the selflessness of phenomena, in particular the emptiness of the mind, first, and then the selflessness of the person. So in some cases, you see it reverse the other way around. Personally, I wonder if in different cultures at different times, if it's easier to realize the emptiness of one thing or another. This is just a question I have, because in our culture at this time, we grew up on a theory of atoms and of knowing that this table is composed of lots of little atoms that have lots of space in between them. And we grew up with that, didn't we? And when we grew up, that film, forget what it was, but there's one film where, you go out into the universe and things are small, and then you come in and you go into all the atoms and cells and, parts of things, and the object that you were looking at vanishes. It was a body, it was somebody's body. But you start going in. Do you remember that? There's two people in a rowboat, and the film, goes out into the universe, and they disappear because you just see the world, the Earth, and then the solar system, and then the universe. So they seem inconsequential. And then the camera zooms in, and it goes into, the person and their body, and then to a part of their body, and then to a cell, and then to the nucleus, and then to, the chromosomes and the genes and the tiny, particles that make up the genes and so on. So we grew up with that. And so already, just with that kind of, that's very different than people 2,600 years ago who didn't have that same kind, didn't grow up thinking like that. So I wonder if for us, understanding that, and, that there's, things don't exist as they appear in terms of the table, isn't such a big deal for us, because, we thought about something similar from our science classes. Whereas our culture emphasizes the self, the I, so much, and we're supposed to be an individual, and we're supposed to be unique, and I this and I that, and we're separated from everybody else, and we're special, and ever since we were so little, this incredible emphasis on the individualism of our own particular I. So I wonder if that makes the I, the self, the person, more difficult to realize the emptiness of, because of how we grew up. This is just some thoughts I have, I'm not sure. Because we grasp pretty strongly to the true existence of ourself, don't we? That's pretty strong. Mm-hmm. Isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, it's just a thought I had. In any case, that's what they usually say. Okay. Now, the awareness that inferentially realizes the emptiness of the person is not the same awareness that inferentially realizes the emptiness of a phenomena. Okay, when you have an inference, when you're meditating using an inference, you have a conceptual understanding of emptiness. You're meditating on the object, let's say the person, and perceiving the emptiness of the person by means of a meaning generality. Okay? That same mind does not perceive the emptiness of the body or the mind or the telephone or the computer. Okay? because it's meditating on the emptiness of the person. It's not meditating on the emptiness of the body or the mind or something else. Okay? On the other hand, if you have a direct realization of emptiness, that direct realization perceives the emptiness of everything. Okay? It's not, doesn't differentiate whether it's a person or a body or a mind or something else. Okay? And that's because it's a direct perception and only emptiness appears to that mind. In the conceptual realization, which is the realization that we get first before we get the direct one, you know, they say, okay, there's a quote that from Aryadeva's The 400 that says, "Who sees one thing is said to see everything. The emptiness of one thing is the emptiness of everything." Okay, so when you are meditating non-conceptually on emptiness, you perceive the emptiness of all phenomena. But inferentially, when you're doing it with a conceptual consciousness, you don't. But it is very easy to go from realizing through inference the emptiness of the person to then realize the emptiness of the body or the emptiness of the mind or the emptiness of some other phenomena, because the structure, you know, of the way you're reasoning is exactly the same. Yeah, and because the self, which you have the realization of, is something that's imputed in dependence upon the body and mind. So just by switching from meditating on the emptiness of self through inference to meditating on the emptiness of the body or the mind, then you can easily realize their emptiness as well. So the example is given, okay, that if you realize that the famous example that they love to use is the child of a barren woman. Okay? Child of a barren woman. Does it exist? No. Okay? Do the fingers and toes of the child of a barren woman exist? No. If you realize that there's no child of a barren woman, you're not directly thinking that there's no fingers and toes of the child of the barren woman, but simply by shifting your mind a little bit to the fingers and toes, you very easily realize that they don't exist because there's no child to start with. Okay, so in the same way, if you realize through inference the emptiness of the person, then since the person is dependent on the body and mind, if you just shift your mind a little bit, even though you're not consciously thinking about, you know, are the body and mind of the person truly existent or not, just by shifting your mind to them, you very quickly realize that the body's not truly existent and the mind isn't truly existent. Why? Because the person, which depends on them, isn't truly existent. Okay? So it's kind of another thing is if you burn the house, then you burn the walls and the floor and everything else. Okay? Because the house exists in dependence upon the walls and the floor. So the self exists in dependence upon the body and mind. If you realize the emptiness of the self conceptually, you just can shift your attention a little bit and then you realize the emptiness of the body and mind conceptually. Okay, you got it? Yeah. Okay, so that's for conceptual consciousness. For direct awareness, when you perceive the emptiness of one thing, you've got the emptiness of everything, because the emptiness of one thing and the emptiness of another thing are indifferentiable to the mind of direct perception.
And that's what that quote was saying.
Yeah, I think, let me see what the quote. It's not clear whether the quote is referring to conceptual or non-conceptual awareness, but the point is that you don't, when you're meditating on emptiness, you know, before you've had the direct understanding and you have the conceptual understanding, if to realize the emptiness of everything, you had to go through the same syllogism and meditate on each thing separately, you'd never finish the end of phenomena, would you? Eternalism is a funny word to me. I think absolutism is better because, you know, like the thing, let's say the person is absolute. It's there independent as an absolute entity. And that's one extreme. The other extreme is the nihilistic extreme, where you say it doesn't exist at all. Okay. Now, there's absolutists and nihilists in almost every society that you can think of. Yeah, at the time of when Nagarjuna lived, the people tended to be on the side of absolutism and to really be grasping at true existence. And this is the extreme that the lower Buddhist schools fall into. This is the extreme that the non-Buddhist schools fall into, is somehow they don't negate enough. And so they're leaving something behind, some kind of self that's really there from its own side, independent of everything else. Okay, so that's the tendency that we're at right now. I mean, most of us are absolutists at the moment. But even when you talk about people with different philosophies and tenet systems, at the time of the Buddha, most people were at the absolutist extreme. You know, if you look at most of the world religions, they're at the absolutist extreme. Okay, then there's the nihilist extreme, and the word nihilism is used in different ways in different contexts. Here, okay, we're referring to the mind thinking that things don't exist, or that cause and effect don't function, cause and effect don't exist. Okay, so it's nihilistic in that way. So at the time when Je Rinpoche lived, many of the early Tibetan philosophers, they had gone to this extreme of nihilism. Remember when Khenzo Jampa Tekchok was here? And he spent quite a bit of time explaining that to us, how people went to the extreme with the object as emptiness. But some people said, you know, if you have that probing awareness analyzing the ultimate, and it doesn't find, you know, it doesn't, you can't find the object that you're looking for, then the object you're looking for doesn't exist at all. And so, you know, people were going to nihilism. Or if it found, that analysis found the emptiness of the object, then since the mind was a reasoning analyzing the ultimate, what that reasoning found must be absolutely existent, must be an ultimate truth. So emptiness must truly exist. Okay, remember that? So people were going to that extreme. What the situation is when you are, let's say, when you're searching for an inherently existent person, that mind does not find an inherently existent person, because an inherently existent person cannot bear analysis, but that mind does find emptiness, finds the emptiness of an inherently existent person. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean the emptiness is truly existent, because that mind was not looking for the emptiness, it was looking for the inherently existent person. If the mind looks for emptiness to see if emptiness is truly existent, again, it doesn't find the true existence of emptiness, it finds the emptiness of emptiness. Okay? So emptiness itself cannot bear analysis. Yeah, but that the inability of something to bear analysis doesn't mean that it doesn't exist at all. It just means that when you have a probing mind looking for the ultimate nature of that thing, it can't find any true existence there. Okay. Anyway, at the time of Jay Rinpoche, lots of people were going to this nihilistic extreme. Okay, and also even in Indian, and the whole confusion, okay, is that the nihilists and the absolutists actually have a very similar way of thinking, even though they have two different extremes. Their way of thinking is, if it exists, it inherently exists. And if it doesn't inherently exist, it doesn't exist at all. Okay? So what they're doing is they're confusing existence with inherent existence, and they're also confusing the emptiness of inherent existence with total non-existence. Okay? So when they're negating inherent existence, then they just say, well, nothing exists at all. Okay, so somebody becomes a nihilist, says nothing exists at all, it doesn't inherently exist. If inherent existence doesn't exist, then nothing exists. Okay, so that's the nihilist side. Then the absolutists say, well, that's impossible that nothing exists because our experiences, our senses, show us that things are here. So therefore they must inherently exist. It can't be that they're empty of inherent existence. They must inherently exist. Okay, so do you see how the nihilists and the absolutists have the same way of thinking, but they're just adopting different positions regarding it? Yeah. The middle way is saying things do not inherently exist, but they exist. How do they exist? They exist dependently. Okay? Things are empty of inherent existence, but they are not totally non-existent. Why? Because they exist dependently. So what you have here is that the emptiness of inherent existence and dependent arising come together. Okay? Yeah, when you understand the deepest meaning of dependence, then they come together. Okay? But in our experience, when we're starting to do the meditation, we really have to correctly identify exactly what it is we're negating, and have this in mind that just because we can't find the self that we're looking for, it doesn't mean that there's no self whatsoever. Okay? The inherently existent self doesn't exist at all, conventionally or ultimately. But the dependently existent self or person does exist. It exists conventionally. Okay? Okay. So there's a quote from J. Tsongkhapa here that says that the difficult point is that one must, from the depths, induce ascertainment with respect to refuting inherent existence without residue. Okay, so you're refuting the establishment by way of the object's own nature, own entity, without leaving anything behind. Okay, you have to ascertain that you can do that. And posit just non-inherently existent persons and so forth as the accumulator of actions, the experience of effects, and so forth. So you have to have a true understanding of emptiness. You have to ascertain that there's no inherent existence whatsoever. There's no existence from its own side whatsoever. And at the same time, be able to posit non-inherently existent persons, in other words, dependently arising persons, that perform actions and experience the effects. Okay, so you have to be able to do that to be able to keep the law of karma, make sense of the law of karma. Because if you say there's no inherently existent person, therefore there's nobody who accumulates karma. Therefore there's nobody who gets reborn. Therefore there's nobody who experiences the result of their own actions. Therefore you can do whatever you want because there's no sense in being ethical. Okay, so that's really, really dangerous. So that's why they say the nihilistic extreme is the worst one. Because if you fall to the nihilistic one, then you're at danger of negating karma and its effects. And if you negate that, then you do all sorts of negative actions and think it's fine. Okay, no problem. Okay, so if you have to choose amongst the extremes, be an absolutist. But the thing is, if you're an absolutist, you're never going to get liberated from cyclic existence. Yeah. But at least you'll try and keep, follow the law of karma. And, observe the functioning of karma. Okay? But, so the challenge is to negate inherent existence, but establish non-inherently existent people as existing. How do they exist? They exist dependently. If something exists dependently, it's not independent. Okay? And independent existence is synonymous with inherent existence. Okay? So if you refute too much and go to the nihilistic extreme, then you deny conventional truths. Okay? If you don't refute enough and go to the absolutist extreme, then you haven't realized the ultimate nature of things. Okay, so you haven't arrived at a correct understanding of the ultimate nature of things. And you also don't understand fully the meaning of saying that things are dependent arisings. Okay, so this is the whole trick. And you know how we recite, in the three principal aspects of the path? When it says appearances clear away the extreme of inherent existence, emptiness clears the way the extreme of non-existence. That's what that line is getting at. Okay, that things aren't non-existent, they're empty. That things are not truly existent, they're dependent. Okay, so that's what Jay Rinpoche is getting at in that one part. Okay. So there's a very beautiful part. I'm just going to read this to you, in which Jay Rinpoche really goes into proving that because things are empty of true existence, the whole path makes sense. And the three jewels exist and the whole thing. So let me read this and I'll explain it maybe as we go. Okay. So, within all phenomena of samsara and nirvana being empty of inherent existence, okay, we can still accept their existence and their ability to function. So things can be empty of true existence and still function at the same time. Let's start by looking at suffering. Okay? Suffering is empty of true existence, but it arises dependent on causes and conditions. Right? It arises dependent on afflictions and tainted karma. It could not arise if things were permanent and static. So if things were truly existent, it means that they would be independent of anything else. If something is independent of all other factors, then it can't have any causes. And it also can't have any parts. And it would have to be permanent, because if it's independent of causes, it can't change. And if it can't change, then it's permanent. So if things are truly existent, they must be permanent. But we know that suffering arises dependent on causes and conditions. And it could not arise if things were permanent and static. Okay? It only arises when certain causes and conditions come together. Not any old causes and conditions, but particular causes and conditions produce suffering. Okay? Because dependent arising exists, okay, the dependent arising of emptiness, of suffering, for example, exists. Therefore, production from causes and conditions exists. Okay? So, because emptiness is dependent, it's dependent on causes and conditions. Production from causes and conditions exists. Therefore, suffering can arise. If dependent arising did not exist, suffering would be independent of causes and conditions and could neither arise nor cease. Because without causes and conditions, it wouldn't come into existence, it couldn't go out of existence. As a dependently created phenomena, suffering does not exist under its own power, and thus it's empty of inherent existence. Okay? Because suffering exists, and it's dependent, and it's impermanent, its causes exist. Okay? Its cessation exists, because if you take away the causes, the cessation of suffering is there, and the paths leading to those cessations of suffering also exist. Okay? There you have the Four Noble Truths, don't you? Suffering, the origins of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the path leading to those cessations. So the Four Noble Truths are established as existing. Since the Four Noble Truths exist, knowing true sufferings, eliminating true origins, actualizing true cessations, and cultivating true paths also exists. Okay, that's what the Buddha said. You know, in terms of each of the Four Noble Truths, there was something we were supposed to do with it. We were supposed to know true suffering, eliminate true causes, actualize true cessations, and cultivate true paths. So all of that exists because things are dependent. Okay? And they're dependent because they're empty. Because these exist, the fruits of the path exist. In other words, these fruits, okay, which are successive levels of realization. So they could be stream entering, once returner, non-returner, arhat. These are levels of realizations of beings in the here vehicles. Okay, so all those different practitioners exist. Okay, since they exist, okay, the practitioners who have attained those, since those realizations exist, the practitioners who have attained them exist, as do the people who are on their way to these attainments. Okay, so the people who are on their way to those attainments, the people who've accomplished those attainments, that's the Sangha refuge. So the Sangha refuge exists. Okay, since the Four Noble Truths exist, okay, the Buddhist doctrine, the Dharma, exists. Why? Because the last two Noble Truths, true cessations and true paths, are the Dharma jewel. Okay, since the Sangha and the Dharma exist, the Buddha who has completed the path and taught the path also exists. Therefore, the three jewels exist. They're established. Okay. So reflecting on all of this, yeah, that because things are empty, independent, arising, and specifically using suffering as an example of that, therefore being able to prove the existence of the Four Noble Truths and prove the existence of the three jewels, that's very powerful, isn't it? That cuts away all the doubt. Because if the Four Noble Truths exist, we have our work cut out for us. If the three jewels exist, then it means it's possible for us to cultivate the three jewels, to cultivate the Dharma refuge in our mind, to become a Sangha, and then to later become a Buddha. So it means we can actualize the three jewels ourselves. It also means that the three jewels are reliable guides to follow on the path. And so there's no reason to doubt them and get confused. Okay, this is very powerful, isn't it? Yeah. So there's something, Jay Rinpoche just laid it out so succinctly. I mean, this is 2 paragraphs here. But it's very, very powerful if you can really meditate on it and see how he's connecting all these things. Yeah, because it gives you very firm faith and confidence in the three jewels and the Four Noble Truths, based not on blind belief, but on reasoning. Yeah, and when your faith is based on reasoning, then it's unshakable. Okay, so we can then establish, that positive and negative karma exists, and the results of happiness and suffering exist, and all the phenomena, sometimes they divide phenomena into the thoroughly afflicted, and what's the English term? The thoroughly afflicted and the completely pure, okay? So the thoroughly afflicted phenomena, in other words, all those that have to do with samsara, that arise in dependence upon ignorance, afflictions, and tainted karma, all those exist. And because it's the true path and true cessation exist, then all the phenomena on the pure side, all the realizations, all the cessations, all the qualities of a Buddha, and all the qualities of the Sangha, those also exist. Okay, so then you can posit the existence of everything that exists. Why? Because it all is empty of true existence and arises dependently. Okay, so dependent arising supports emptiness, and emptiness supports dependent arising. Okay, because things arise in dependence on other factors, such as their causes and conditions, in the case of functioning things, the independence on their parts, independence on the mind that conceives and labels them. Because they arise dependently, then they don't exist under their own power, and they lack the ability to set themselves up, to come into existence and to stay existent all by themselves, independent of everything else. So thus they must be empty. So that's how emptiness, how dependent arises proves emptiness. And then emptiness supports dependent arising in the same way, because things are empty, but they exist dependently like illusions, okay? So things are illusory-like. They are not illusions, but they exist like illusions, in that they appear one way but exist in another way. Okay? So by saying things are empty, and if they're empty, then they must be dependent arising, then they exist nominally. They exist dependent on causes and conditions, parts, names and labels. They function, okay? And so we have emptiness and dependent arising going together, complementing each other. Okay, there's a beautiful quote that Nagarjuna used to start the treatise on the Middle Way. This is his homage to the Buddha. It says, I prostrate to the perfect Buddha, the best of teachers, who taught that whatever is dependently arisen is unceasing, unborn, unannihilated, not permanent, not coming, not going, without distinction, without identity, and free from conceptual construction. Yeah. That verse that's how he praises the Buddha. Then the whole rest of the text is explaining the meaning of that. And then Jay Rinpoche wrote a commentary on that text that's this thick. Okay, and it all comes back to that verse. Okay, so it unpacks the meaning of all those different terms and proves them, but it's planting a seed saying that. Okay, so the people who hold different tenets besides the Prasangika tenets, they can't reconcile dependent arising and emptiness. Yeah, because remember, they say if it's empty, it's non-existent. And if it's dependently arising, it's inherently existent. So they can't bring the two together. Yeah, and so they miss the middle way, and they fall to one extreme or the other. And if you fall to one extreme or the other, then there's no way to see things as they are, to negate inherent existence and still establish conventional existence. Yeah, and so then one's realization of the ultimate nature is not on the spot. And one also can't posit the existence of conventional phenomena either. Okay, so you miss out on both truths. You don't perceive the ultimate truth because you've gone to the extreme of absolutism and nihilism. And if you can't perceive the ultimate truth, then you also can't perceive the conventional truth as a dependently arisen thing. So you're missing out on that thing too. So you're not perceiving either of the two truths in a totally correct manner. Yeah. So then you're really stuck, aren't you? Stuck in samsara. So this is why, seeing that emptiness and dependent arising are compatible is important, and why understanding the object of negation in the meditation on emptiness is important. Because if you don't get the object of negation right, you negate too much and fall in the extreme of nihilism, or you negate too little and fall in the extreme of absolutism. Okay? Okay. Oh, one other important point. Yeah. Just the words dependent arising refute the two extremes. Okay? Dependent refutes inherent existence or independent existence, the extreme of absolutism. Okay, so if things are dependent, they can't be independent. Okay, so they can't exist absolutely. And arising refutes total non-existence and the extreme of nihilism, because if they arise, they exist. Okay? So dependent means they aren't independent. It refutes absolutism. Arising means they exist, which refutes nihilism. So just the words dependent arising are steering us in the right direction. Things can either be truly existent or not truly existent. There's no third alternative. So if you negate truly existent, you have to say things are empty of true existence. But when we realize emptiness, we're not making things that were previously truly existent, now suddenly they become not truly existent. Okay? So when we're negating emptiness, we're not changing the status of existence of phenomena. It's not like they were truly existent and we're making them empty. They've always been empty. They're empty right now. The problem is that we don't realize the emptiness. The problem is that we have the grasping at true existence. That's what the problem is. Okay? So when we realize emptiness, yeah, we're not changing the status of existence of phenomena. We're just realizing things as they are. That's why another synonym for emptiness is thusness. Things are thus, as it is, as it isness, or thatness, or thusness. We're just realizing things as they actually are, without all these other elaborations pasted on top of them. Okay? So we're not creating anything new or, changing how things exist. All we're doing is seeing how they exist. And by that, the grasping or the conception of true existence gets worn away and it goes out of style, out of existence, gets dumped. Okay? Good.